Hi, folks. My name is Brian Trippett, and I'm known as the Front Porch Conservative. Today is Tuesday, July the 4th, and I wanted to play a clip from my weekend show, Front Porch Brunch, where I read part of a speech written and delivered by Rush Limbaugh's father concerning what happened to many of the founding fathers after they signed the Declaration of Independence. Take a listen, enjoy, and have a happy 4th of July. My name is Brian Trippett. I am your front porch conservative. Step on up to my electronic front porch and let's talk. I want to do one last thing on this live stream, especially given that we're going into the um, the 4th of July, Tuesday of this week. And I want to read something written by Rush Limbaugh. Not the Rush Limbaugh that everybody knows and loves and misses desperately, but Rush Limbaugh Jr., his father. Now, for those of you who don't know a whole lot of Rush Limbaugh III's backstory, his dad was a very famous lawyer in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. He was also a member of the Missouri state legislature at one time in his life. And he was also an orator. He would give speeches, on various topics at request. And one of them was he wrote an address about the men who signed the Declaration of Independence. And I'm going to pull it up here in a second and read from parts of it because I think that it is very healthy for us in 2023, now almost 250 years removed from the signing of the Declaration of Independence, the adoption of the Declaration of Independence. I think it is very pertinent for us to know what these men went through and what they sacrificed personally and professionally to give us what we are today. This comes from rushlimbaugh.com. And the first part of the speech talks about the day of the adoption of the Declaration. And here's the part I want to get to. It's a section of the speech called Much to Lose. What kind of men were the 56 signers who adopted the Declaration of Independence and who, by their signing, committed an act of treason against the crown? To each of you, the names Franklin, Adams, Hancock, and Jefferson are almost as familiar as household words. Most of us, however, know nothing of the other signers. Who were they, and what happened to them? I imagine that many of you are somewhat surprised at the names not there: George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, Patrick Henry. All of them were elsewhere. Ben Franklin was the only really old man. 18 of the signers were under the age of 40. 3 of them were in their 20s. Of the 56, almost half, 24 of them, were judges and lawyers. 11 were merchants, 9 were landowners and farmers, and the remaining 12 were doctors, ministers, and politicians. With the only exceptions, such as Samuel Adams of Massachusetts, these were men of substantial property. All but 2 had families. The vast majority of men of education and standing in their communities. They had economic security as few men had in the 18th century. Each had far more to lose from revolution than they had to gain by it. John Hancock, one of the richest men in America, already had a price of 500 pounds on his head. He signed in enormous letters so that His Majesty could now read his name without glasses and could now double the reward. Ben Franklin wryly noted, "Indeed, we must all hang together, otherwise we shall all most assuredly hang separately. Fat Benjamin Harrison of Virginia told tiny Elbridge Gerry of Massachusetts, quote, "With me, it will be over in a minute, but you will be dancing on air an hour after I'm gone." These men knew what they risked. The penalty for treason was death by hanging, and remember, a great British fleet was already at anchor in New York Harbor. They were sober men. There were no dreamy-eyed intellectuals or draft card burners here. There were they were far from hot-eyed fanatics yammering for an explosion. They simply asked for the status quo. It was change they resisted. It was equality with the mother country that they desired. It was taxation with representation that they sought. They were all conservatives, yet they rebelled. It was principle, not poverty, that had brought these men to Philadelphia. 2 of them became presidents of the United States. 7 of them became state governors. 1 died in office as vice president of the United States. Several would go on to be U.S. senators. 1, the richest man in America, in 1828 founded the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. 1, a delegate from Philadelphia, was the only real poet, musician, and philosopher of the signers. It was he, Francis Hopkinson, not Betty Ross, who designed the United States flag. Richard Henry Lee, a delegate from Virginia, had introduced the resolution to adopt the Declaration in June of 1776. He was prophetic in his concluding remarks. "Why then, sir, why do we longer delay? Why still deliberate? Let this happy day give birth to an American republic. Let her arise not to devastate and to conquer, but to reestablish the reign of peace and law. The eyes of Europe are fixed upon us. She demands of us a living example of freedom, that we may exhibit in contrast to the felicity of the citizen to an ever-increasing tyranny which desolates her polluted shores. She invites us to prepare an asylum where the unhappy may find solace and the persecuted riposte. And if we are not this day wanting in our duty, the names of the American legislatures of 1776 will be placed by posterity at the side of all those whose memory has been and ever will be dear to virtuous men and good citizens." Though the resolution was formally adopted July 4th, it was not until July 8th that 2 of the states authorized their delegates to sign. It was not until August 2nd that the signers met in Philadelphia to actually put their names on the Declaration. William Ellery, delegate from Rhode Island, was curious to see the signers' faces as they committed the supreme act of personal courage. He saw some men sign quickly, but in no face was he able to discern real fear. Stephen Hopkins, Ellery's colleague from Rhode Island, was a man past 60. As he signed with a shaking hand, he declared, "My hand trembles, my heart does not." Even before the list was published, the British marked down every member of Congress suspected of having put their name to treason. All of them became the objects of vicious manhunts. Some were taken. Some, like Jefferson, had narrow escapes. All who had property or families near British strongholds suffered. Francis Lewis, New York delegate, saw his home plundered and his estate in what is now Harlem completely destroyed by British soldiers. Mrs. Lewis was captured and treated with great brutality. Though she was later exchanged for 2 British prisoners through the efforts of the Congress, she died from the effects of her abuse. William Floyd, another New York delegate, was able to escape with his wife and children across Long Island Sound to Connecticut, where they lived as refugees without income for 7 years. When they came home, they found a devastated ruin. Phillips Livingstone had all of his great holdings in New York confiscated and his family driven out of their home. Livingston died in 1778, still working in Congress for the cause. Lewis Morris, the 4th New York delegate, saw all of his timber, crops, and livestock taken. For 7 years, he was barred from his home and his family. John Hart of Trenton, New Jersey, risked his life to return home to see his dying wife. Hessian soldiers rode after him, and he escaped into the woods. While his wife lay on her deathbed, the soldiers ruined his farm and wrecked his homestead. Hart, 65, slept in caves and woods as he was hunted across the countryside. When at long last, emaciated by hardship, he was able to sneak home, he found his wife had already been buried and his 13 children had been taken away. He never saw them again. He died a broken man in 1779 without ever finding his family. Dr. John Witherspoon, signer, was president of the College of New Jersey, later called Princeton. The British occupied the town of Princeton and billeted troops in the college. They trampled and burned the finest college in the country. Judge Richard Stockton, another New Jersey delegate signer, was rushed back to his estate in an effort to evacuate his wife and children. The family found refuge with friends, but a Tory sympathizer betrayed them. Judge Stockton was pulled from his bed in the night and brutally beaten by arresting soldiers. Thrown in a common jail, he was deliberately starved. Congress finally arranged for Stockton's parole, but his health was ruined. The judge was released as an invalid when he could no longer harm the British cause. He returned home to find his estate looted and did not live to see the triumph of the Revolution. His family was forced to live off charity. Robert Morris, merchant prince of Philadelphia, delegate and signer, met Washington's appeals and pleas for money year after year. He made and raised arms and provisions, which made it possible for Washington to cross the Delaware into Trenton. In the process, he lost 150 ships, bleeding his own fortune and credit almost dry. George Claimer, Pennsylvania signer, escaped with his family from the home, but their property was completely destroyed by the British in the Germantown and Brandywine campaigns. Dr. Benjamin Rush, also from Pennsylvania, was forced to flee to Maryland. As a heroic surgeon with the Army, Rush had several narrow escapes. John Martin, a Tory in his views previous to the debate, lived in a strongly loyalist area of Pennsylvania. When he came out for independence, most of his neighbors and even some of his relatives ostracized him. He was a sensitive and troubled man, and many believed this action killed him. When he died in 1777, his last words to his tormentors were, "Tell them that they will live to see an hour when they shall acknowledge it," the signing, "to have been the most glorious service I have ever rendered to my country." William Ellery, Rhode Island delegate, saw his property and home burned to the ground. Thomas Lynch, South Carolina delegate, had his health broken from privation and exposures while serving as a company commander in the military. His doctors ordered him to seek care in the West Indies, and on the voyage, he and his young bride were drowned at sea. Edward Rutledge, Arthur Middleton, and Thomas Haywood Jr., the three other South Carolina signers, were taken by the British in the siege of Charleston. They were carried away as prisoners of war to Augustine, Florida, where they were singled out for indignities. They were exchanged at the end of the war, the British in the meantime having completely devastated their large land holdings and their estates. Thomas Nelson, signer of Virginia, was at the front of command of the Virginia military forces when the British General Lord Cornwallis in Yorktown, fire from 70 heavy American guns began to destroy Yorktown piece by piece. Cornwallis and his staff moved their headquarters into Nelson's palatial home. While American cannonballs were making shambles of the town, the house of Governor Nelson remained untouched. Nelson turned in rage to the American governors and said, "Why do you spare my home?" They said, "Sir, out of respect to you." Thomas Nelson cried, "Give me the cannon," and fired on his own magnificent home himself, smashing it to bits. But Nelson's sacrifice was not quite over. He had raised $2 million for the revolutionary cause by pledging his own estates. When the loans came due, a newer peacetime Congress refused to honor them, and Nelson's property was forfeit. He was never reimbursed. He died impoverished a few years later at the age of 50. There's a little bit more to that article, but I'm just going to stop it right there. The next time that some blue-haired, pierced, whatever they are, tells you that a bunch of old white men ruined this country from the start, go find that article on Rush Limbaugh's website and or just Google it. You can find it. It's real easy to find. Read them some of that, or let them read it for themselves and let it sink in what those 56 men, a lot of them, gave up so that you and me can sit here today talking to each other and getting ready to celebrate our country's independence. Hopefully, it makes them change their mind. If you like what I do here, please do me some favors. Number one, please give me a thumbs up on the video. Number two, leave a comment below. Number three, please subscribe to the channel. And number four, please share it around. I'll take all the help I can get. My name is Brian Trippett. I am your Front Porch Conservative, and I'll see you